Hey everybody, it's Tatiana with Back to Facts. So while everyone is talking about Afghanistan, and I'm absolutely devastated about, I thought I would go over the vaccine effectiveness studies, whether the vaccine reduces hospitalization or severity of the illness. This one measures hospitalization. It was just published by the CDC on August 18th, or close to that. But right off the bat, I saw a major flaw. The major flaw is that there's no looking at people who were not hospitalized who may have tested positive. So the control group, get this, the control group was people who tested negative who were both vaccinated and not vaccinated. The case group was people who tested positive with a PCR test. All of them were hospitalized, by the way. So right off the bat I saw, well, what about the people out of the hospital? If you're going to measure hospitalization, then you should definitely look at those who were successfully out of the hospital, I think. The study itself is a bunch of, it's clear enough. I was going to say gobbledygook, but it's clear enough. But the limitations are interesting. So by its own account, this study says, the findings in this report are subject to at least 6 limitations. First, the follow-up period was limited to approximately 24 weeks since receipt of full vaccination because of the recent authorization of mRNA COVID-19 vaccines in the United States. These trials will not be finished for another 2 years. So they had to say that was a limitation. It's only been 24 weeks. Do they say that in the news articles? No. They go on with the first limitation. Additional analyses with longer duration of follow-up since vaccination are warranted. Well, are they going to do those additional analyses? Should we follow up? Should we put that on our calendar so we make sure they do it? My bet is they won't do it. Second limitation. Okay, they left Johnson & Johnson out. They say it's non-mRNA, but it's actually DNA. Instead of going into the cytoplasm with mRNA, they go into the nucleus of your cells, into the DNA of the cell, and they splice that DNA. It becomes part of the genome of that cell. But those were not included in this study. It was just Pfizer and Moderna. Third limitation. Time-varying vaccine effectiveness was not assessed by lineage because of sample size. Okay. Fourth, residual confounding might have been present, although the analysis adjusted for potential confounders, including calendar time and patient age. So there are other factors as far as hospitalization, which actually rings true with my thinking because the ones that were in the control group that tested negative, they had symptoms. They had COVID-like symptoms, but they tested negative and they were in the hospital. But if you have people who have COVID-like symptoms but tested negative in a PCR test, that's evidence for the future. That's evidence for the entire case of this being exaggerated and manipulated and politicized. But right now it's just in there as a way to bolster the idea that those who tested positive and were vaccinated were the smallest population in the hospital. I mean, who designs this stuff? What is going on? It's as bad as our lack of strategy in Afghanistan. Fifth, this analysis did not consider vaccine effectiveness over time among persons aged less than 18 years or partially vaccinated persons. Finally, the sixth limitation is, the current analysis only included hospitalized adults and did not include persons with asymptomatic SARS-CoV-2, could be pre-symptomatic, could be that wasn't replicating and the body had already killed it effectively, with asymptomatic SARS-CoV-2 infection or COVID-19 who did not require hospitalizations. Let me read that to you again. Finally, the current analysis only included hospitalized adults and did not include persons with asymptomatic SARS-CoV-2 infection or COVID-19 who did not require hospitalization. There, my friends, is the entire kahuna. And I've been wanting to say something else. probably 3 years ago now, my son was in preschool and he was getting sick a lot. You know, when they're toddlers and they're in preschool, they get sick a lot. Also, I found out from my friend who's a Montessori teacher for many, many years. She said that when you are teaching the toddler and preschool population, that when you first start, you're getting sick a lot, because that is where human beings are becoming acquainted with various viruses that are in our biome here. Then I said, okay, great. He's getting to know this stuff. I'm not going to panic. That's great. And sure enough, he stopped getting sick, probably when he turned 5 or 5.5. Then I searched for, how do you know if you should send your child to school? How do you know if you should keep your child from going to school if you feel like they have symptoms? For 100 years now, or maybe since penicillin, okay, we have had the standard that if your child or anyone has a temperature above 98.6, but a fever, then that is how you decide to keep them from going to school. Yes, it's a fever. So if your child does not have a fever, you can send them to school. If your child has a fever, you keep them from school, and then I think they need to be fever-free for, I think it was 12 hours. It could have been 24. I saw many, many videos and testimonials and websites and everything from doctors who said, this is the standard. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about at all. When I was going up to Montana, and it was December 2017, my niece was having her second child. My child got an earache, and I had gotten some symptoms, but neither one of us had a fever. So we went up, and I actually went to urgent care in Bozeman, Montana. Went to urgent care, and she just looked at me. She did not take a culture, nothing like that. And after examining me, she said, you have a virus. And I said, how do you know? Well, there were certain criteria that none of us have ever heard of. So she said, I'm going to prescribe you a steroid. And steroids have been prescribed for run-of-the-mill viruses, respiratory virus, anything. You got to catch it early. So I went and got the steroid, and I just thought, this is so interesting. Like, she didn't even do a test, but she could tell if it was a virus or if it was like a bacteria, like, for example, strep. So we go along, and it turns out that was the worst flu season in a long time. After the baby was born, I was in the room, but my son was still sick. We took him in, and he had it was called fifth disease. I don't even know if it's a bacteria or a virus, but because of that, we decided, in the abundance of caution, and we agreed anyway to not go in the room with the newborn. And we said goodbye, and then we were about to go visit some relatives who were elderly. And I told them we still were kind of sick, and they said, well, it's pretty touch and go for us, so maybe you shouldn't come to our house at all. So we got a hotel, and, we flew home. But I heard after the fact that actually my sister got the flu, which I don't think that we had. I was just glad that I kept my elderly relatives safe, and that was before COVID. So, common sense is really important here. To put a one-size-fits-all assessment on every virus is pretty silly. Also, in the face of evidence, like, for example, in April 2020, we already knew that catching the virus early was important. Dr. Peter McCullough had already shared that. He's a pulmonologist, and he's a nephrologist, so a kidney and lung specialist in Texas. And what he saw is, no, the worst thing you can do is tell someone to go home if they test positive. They need to be treated right away. Why are we in the 18th or 19th month right now, and people still are going home to isolate and quarantine? I don't want to go on too long, but I did want to share my findings of the study that says that hospitalizations are less in vaccinated people. If you missed the beginning, I want to say that the whole population of this study is in the hospital. There is nobody in this study who did not go to the hospital. So overall, there were 3,089 participants in the study. This is a nationwide study about whether the vaccinated have less of a chance of going to the hospital and having a severe illness. 3,089 cases overall. Those who were in the hospital and tested positive for COVID is 1,194. Those who were in the hospital and tested negative for COVID was 1,895. So more people in the hospital tested negative in this test than those who tested positive, vaccinated or not. Okay, there's that, all right? So we're talking, there are people who tested negative in spite of vaccination status. They were in the hospital for something else. Next line, the fully vaccinated out of 3,089 people was 1,129 people. Now, out of those fully vaccinated, 141 tested positive by a PCR test for the corona or COVID-19. 988 of the fully vaccinated tested negative. That's great. Those who had pre-existing conditions, so out of those who had cardiovascular disease, 647 tested positive for COVID-19 and were in the hospital. You want to know how many people were in the hospital with cardiovascular disease who tested negative for COVID-19? You think it's more or less than the ones who tested positive? Tell me. Way more. Twice as much. So those who had cardiovascular disease in this study who were in the hospital this year, actually it was like April and May, okay, who tested negative for COVID-19 was twice as much as those who tested positive. Even with cardiovascular disease, they didn't have COVID-19 and they were still in the hospital. So that right there tells you there's other reasons that they're in the hospital. Pulmonary disease, 804 participants total out of the overall 3,000. And those who tested positive for COVID-19, 257. Those who tested negative for COVID-19, out of those with pulmonary disease, 547. There is not a single pre-existing condition that has those who tested positive in the hospital out of a population of 3,000 as more than those who tested negative for SARS-CoV-2 who were in the hospital. Tells you right there, this whole thing is deliberately steered toward a vaccine. Because if you're studying how many vaccinated get into the hospital and you have more people who don't even have the disease, you know that the reason is that this virus has a very low severity and fatality rate. How do I know this? Well, not all of these people were vaccinated who tested negative. By a long shot, 988 people were unvaccinated in this study out of 3,000. Diabetes mellitus, 348 with diabetes tested positive for COVID-19 and were hospitalized. 604 tested negative and were hospitalized. And you know, those include the unvaccinated. That is what we're not seeing. You get the point. So thanks for watching. I haven't looked at the Los Angeles study. The CDC released this study, which was like 19 or 20 hospitals around the country. And they looked at their records, you know, it was like a retrospective study. And then the CDC also released a study in Los Angeles, also regarding the hospitalized, vaccinated or not. I haven't looked at that yet, so stay tuned. Thank you for watching. And above all, keep calm and share complete facts. And please, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Wherever you see this, please connect with us because all of us are making a difference. I am not getting my information from anywhere else. I am looking at information independently as an experiment so that I can see what I'm actually finding out. I don't listen to other opinions or pundits. I look at the data myself. So please sign up so you can see what's going on as we go forward in these uncertain times. All right, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.